welcome to the Lost Classics. With Halloween just around the corner, there's no better time to visit one of the great horror subgenres. Lately, everyone seems to be crazy after the vampire romances, so much so that the other undead are criminally overlooked. If the Cullens are the elegant pouting heartthrobs of the deceased, then surely zombies are their down and dirty punk cousins. What better film to celebrate that fact than the granddaddy of zombie punk, Dan O'Bannon's Return of the Living Dead. Before we get into it, we might just take a look at the not-so-secret history of zombies. For years, the roots of zombies were rigidly tied to the voodoo rituals and legends of the West Indies, as detailed in William Seabrook's early 20th century travelogue, The Magic Island. The first zombie movie, the Bela Lugosi starring White Zombie, was based in part on the book, as well as sets that were left over from Universal's Dracula and Frankenstein. It was followed by the likes of Revenge of the Zombies, King of the Zombies, Voodoo Man, as well as the Val Lewton produced I Walked with a Zombie. The theme linking all of these films was that the undead, or living impaired if you prefer, were just drones, slaves to Bela Lugosi or John Carradine.
They are my servant.
Then in 1968 a Pennsylvania advertising company changed its name from Latent Image to Image 10 and released a grainy little movie named Night of the Living Dead. No longer were the dead reanimated by voodoo practices, but by a probe returning from Saturn, or was it a comet? Or the Egyptian god Anubis, or I don't know, something. No longer did they have a master, but they were instead driven by the impulse to feed on the living. Something they did with gusto, turning the countryside into an all-you-can-eat buffet and forever changing the cinematic landscape of horror. Some even claimed that Night of the Living Dead was the primary reason for the R rating being introduced in America shortly afterwards. Prior to this, it would have been possible for children to get in to see horror films alone, but no longer. Image 10 split into two main factions following the success of Night of the Living Dead. George A. Romero went on to make a bunch of films that you may have heard of. They all had Of the Dead in the title, whereas John Russo kept the Living Dead moniker. Not that others didn't get in on it too. Before John Russo could even put his plans into actions, Crypt of the Living Dead and City of the Living Dead came out. The latter, also named The Gates of Hell, was made by Lucio Fulci, who proved that he was an equal opportunities opportunist when he also made a sequel to the European release of Dawn of the Dead. It was called Zombie. He made Zombie 2, also known as Zombie Flesh Eaters, but I guess that all those titles are for another day. But getting back on track, John Russo wrote the story for a follow-up in both screenplay and novel format, leaving Alien scribe Dan O'Bannon with directing duties. O'Bannon was no stranger to the zombie pantheon, as he had co-wrote with Ronald Shusett the screenplay for 1981's shocker Dead and Buried. Return of the Living Dead was released shortly before Day of the Dead. However, that's where the similarities end. Whereas Day is dark, grim and nihilistic, Return is fun and entertaining. Even the dead seem to be in on the comedy aspects. Well, apart from her.
I can feel myself rot.
The theme of the movie seems to be that we're all going to hell, so we may as well have a party en route. The story starts off with one of the greatest prologues I've ever seen. We meet this young guy, Freddy, on his first day of work at a medical warehouse. The facility is even named UNITA, so you can see how light it's all going to be. Freddy seems to have a morbid fascination with all the skeletons and body parts, so I guess you can think of him as Igor, if he was a fan of Sisters of Mercy. Freddy's supervisor Frank picks up on this and takes delight in telling Freddy that the movie Night of the Living Dead was based on a true story, wherein the dead were brought back to life by a top secret gas used by the military. The army lost track of some of the canisters containing both gas and corpses, and wouldn't you know it, one of them happens to be in the basement of UNITA. The army must have really cheaped out on its containers though, as with one tap the gas is released and the corpse reanimated. Frank and Freddy also get infected by the gas, as do any of the bodies in the nearby meat locker, including this guy that looks like he's just been tangoed. Unlike Night of the Living Dead and all the other zombie films of the time, these guys don't go down so easy, which gives Freddy one of the most infamous horror lines of all time.
Working now, Frank.
I'm in the movie line!
There. It actually is pretty cool. It echoes John Carpenter's The Thing, with each body part seeming to act independently, and even destroying the brain doesn't help. With the aid of their boss Bert and nearby mortician Ernie, yep, Bert and Ernie, great stuff, they incinerate the dismembered body parts, which just causes things to get a whole lot worse. More of the gas is released as smoke from the oven, and it spreads to the nearby graveyard, where Freddy's friends are waiting for him. So the characters have to deal with a whole cemetery of the undead now. And they're in varying states of decay too, which is pretty cool actually. Some really good effects here. Unlike other zombie movies at the time, these guys can speak, and more importantly, run. So if you credited 28 Days Later with creating the running zombie, now you know better. Don't say it don't teach you nothing. The zombies, living impaired, can even order takeout, as is evidenced in this iconic scene where they speak to emergency dispatch and ask the operator to...
Hello, welcome to Jill Sandwiches. Can I take your order?
Send more paramedics.
Would you like a side order with that?
The film is peppered by performances from such genre stars as Linnea Quigley, Mark Venturini, Miguel Nunez, and Tom Matthews. Tom Matthews would appear as Tommy Jarvis in Friday the 13th Part 6 Jason Lives. That's my favourite Friday. And that's not the only connection. I think half the cast ended up appearing in the next couple of Fridays. And nope, I'm not talking about Ice Cube's films. A sequel was released in 1987, and though it went for a more kid-friendly approach and a less dark ending, it's still very entertaining. Especially for the scene where a zombie appears dressed as Michael Jackson in the Thriller video. Tom Matthews and James Caan also returned with The Living Dead, this time as grave robbers, but with the same comic chemistry as before. Return of the Living Dead 3 was even better than the first sequel. If you like your 80s horror, you definitely owe it to yourself to check it out. It was released in 1991, but it feels like a leftover from the previous decade. It has a similar feel to the 1988 lost classic Night of the Demons. There were a couple more direct-to-DVD sequels starring Peter Coyote and the Naughties. However, I haven't watched them, and to be honest, what I have seen wasn't very promising. Along with the concept of the running zombie, Return can also be credited with introducing the idea of brain-hungry living dead, which was put to hilarious effect in The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror, where the zombies passed over Homer as he didn't have the sufficient grey matter for them. Similarly, Return brought in one of the iconic zombies in Tarman, someone who has to be up there with Flyboy from the original Dawn of the Dead, Big Daddy from Land of the Dead, and yes, my personal favourite, Zombie Baby from Peter Jackson's Brain Dead. Although it spawned 4 sequels, it must be noted that Return series has nothing to do with the other Living Dead series that are out there, such as Island of the Living Dead, Children of the Living Dead, and the actually quite good Flight of the Living Dead. If you like your horror witty or have a pang of nostalgia for the 80s movies, or you just even want to just go out and get a nice popcorn flick for a Halloween night, you should definitely check it out.
No, what are we gonna do? We're gonna call the boss.
That's it, Dave, done.